morning. My name is Vernell, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the XML for the Small Publisher conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you, Mr. Suplak. You may begin your conference, sir.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and good morning. I'd like to greet you to the first SST Web Seminar of 2009. This seminar has been organized in collaboration with the Association of American University Presses. The full title of this seminar is XML for the Small Publisher, The Right Choice. The speakers today are two very distinguished individuals with much experience in the STM industry. The first is going to be Bob Kelly of the American Physical Society, and the second will be Andy Williams of Cambridge University Press. I am the moderator, Greg Suplak of Cadmus Communications. A few housekeeping items that I'd like to bring to mind before we get started with the presentations today. If you're having problems connecting to the web portion of the seminar or have any problems during the call, please press star 0 for WebEx operator assistance of the WebEx screen. You can send your questions to me at any time, and I will choose which ones to ask the speakers. If there are burning questions aimed at a particular speaker, we will have time for a couple of these after each presenter is finished. However, we will leave most questions for a panel discussion at the end of the presentations. The speakers have kindly agreed to stay longer than our 90 minutes if necessary. This web seminar is being recorded. You will be able to listen to the seminar again using a link we will circulate to all registrants after the seminar is finished. You will also receive a copy of the presentations via email after the call. After the seminar is finished, we will send you a link to an online feedback survey. Please help us improve these web seminars by completing this form. Thank you very much, and that's the conclusion of the housekeeping segment of this. I'm going to turn things over now to Bob Kelly from APS, and Bob's going to give a presentation entitled, Why is XML Workflow an Advantage? Bob, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Greg. I put together a story or a tale on XML as an advantage, and it's something that I've been working on since 1983. 1983, I picked up the responsibility of helping a very large publisher go into a new form of distribution. That publisher was IBM. And we crafted a GML strategy at that time, which eventually became XML. And that's what I want to share with you, both from a large publisher's point of view and a small publisher's point of view. And it's really got nothing to do with technology. It's about solving business problems and bringing out new products. The little chart that's in the middle of the purple ball on the screen is a copy of a slide that I used testifying in Congress before the Joint Committee on Printing in 1993 that depicts the basic tenet of my view, and that is that you should be able to, using computer-assisted tools, old-fashioned word, prepare a document that is independent of its format and then use the resulting files to solve business problems and bring out new products. And that's what I want to talk through today. So you won't hear anything much about any WYSIWYG or great ways of using XML in terms of flashy products. It's about solving challenges that we all have and are all trying to deal with in our business. Oh, it's not going down, Greg. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay, let me just add another piece of information to it. In 2007, the National Science Foundation came out with a study that basically said that having digital content, and I'm not going to read all these words, but having digital content allows us tons of new opportunities, new forms of research, scholarship, reading, deliverables, products, and that's a continuation of the concept that I've been talking about since 1983. The basic structure says that with XML, or Generalized Markup Language, or GML, something that is standardized, in our case at APS, it's for text, equations, and figures, We believe that with a standard archival file, we can create other deliverables without recreating the source. When I was back in IBM in 1983, people had desires to create other deliverables out of a source code or a product that was being recreated as a book. But what people ended up doing is recreating the file first before they went and created the new output. And the concept with XML is that you can use that file to create other deliverables without going through all the expense of recreating the source files. The diagram there, it's a flashlight, basically says that with a single standardized process, you can have multiple product and multiple business opportunities. And that's the point. The point is that why invent all the stuff that you've already done when you can reuse it, repurpose it, and go off to new things? Content, in one way, in the web world, it is a web world, and it should only be created once. It allows you to create multiple deliverables, such as print, which means PDFs, browsers, smart devices like my iPhone, e-books, accessible readers for the blind, people who read things in different ways. It also allows us to put together multiple deliverables. For an example, you can deliver to a secondary publisher using the same files that you use to create a book. Secondary publishers could be Scopus, it could be ISI, it could be OCLC, it could be any of the database publishers that use content. The advantage of delivering it from the content or the source files that you created is that it's guaranteed to be accurate. There's no translation, there's no rekeying of the content. It allows you to provide an archival source file that you know is right. And we all know that every time you rekey something, you introduce the possibility of errors. The concept here says that if I don't rekey it and I use the same, I'm minimizing the possible. Federated searching means that you have one entry into multiple databases, yours, mine, and others. Having it in a marked-up world allows you to come in and do that without recreating the content. APS is involved with IEEE, for example, in a federated search experiment called Cytopia. It allows us to do something that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have all this tag language. And then there's all the buzz about Web 2.0 and Web 3.0, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in the next couple of slides. But the point is that without it, you can't go forward. And it's really important that if you want to go forward, and I think you have to in today's world, you have to be thinking of what's my next opportunity. It's not going to be what I've been doing all along. It's going to be something different, and you need to be prepared to be able to do so, to be able to go forward. Another point, if I look at product business rationale, one of the challenges that we all face is organizational restructuring, moving content or products or development from location to location. Having it in a standardized format allows you to do that, allows you to move it across the locations of your organization. It's important to be able to separate formatting from production. By production I mean making the XML files or the marked up content, allows you to create multiple formats from a single source, allows you to have reusable documentation. It introduces the concept of automated navigation. In the early days, I'm sure some of you will go back to the old print days, when one created a document, one had to go through creating things separately, such as the table of contents, the index. The index frequently was the last thing that went through the printing press because you didn't have all the pagination ready until you went through or getting ready to go on press. With marked up content, all your navigation is automated and derived from the tagging. Searching is automated, or the index creation is automated, and of course you can go online. Another advantage is it allows you to integrate content with other publishers. We made an experiment back in 1994-95 with companies like Elsevier, several other publishers, where we worked out ways to integrate the content into a single search database. Now it's commonplace for people to do that, but in those days it was not common and nobody knew that we could do it. We can. We build products for data feeds. We build Web 3 products, and I'll talk a little bit about those, Web 2 and 3. We're building now accessible products, which I will talk about some more, but basically an accessible product is one that can be consumed or used by users who are visually impaired, print impaired, products that need to be navigated by listening to. We're building those, and we're starting to build those now, as well as interactive products. So all this is possible single source file. And that's the point of the whole thing. We can create new business and new products. Let me just quickly run through a large publisher's challenge. IBM in the 1980s had 55 authoring locations scattered around the world. They were publishing thousands upon thousands of books. The books were published in 33 different languages in some cases. They were written all over the world. IBM not only being known as standing for I've been moved, it also stood for I've been reorganized. And one of their business challenges was they would move a product development or a book development from one site to another, and the other site had separate tools, so they had to rekey everything in to get there. When they adopted a shared documentation development strategy, which was generalized markup language, which was the predecessor to HTML. I don't know if you've all heard of Charles Goldfarb. He worked for IBM at the time, and he was one of the innovators of HTML, and the early version of that was called generalized markup language, and IBM adopted that as a strategy to go across the entire organization. It saved tons of money, and it allowed them to continue on their merry way of reorganizing and restructuring without having the expense of rekeying all the documentation. We also found that by separating composition from formatting, one could use tagging for navigation. That became pretty valuable benefit that we didn't even think of at the time. In 1985 or so, we created the first electronic deliverable that was searchable, navigable, readable for sighted and visually impaired readers, all built from the same source code file, the same file that made the book. And that was really proof of the concept and proof of the strategy that you can write it once and reuse it on multiple platforms, multiple deliverables. APS, in 1995, we decided, I was hired to come on board in 1993 actually, but in 1995 we were going to create new products. We had 7 journals at the time. They were all in print, and the challenge was to take these journals and start to go online. So in one way, we're a small publisher. We only have 7 deliverables. Now we have 9. We decided to start with physical review letters, or PRL. You might not believe this, but in 1993, PRL was introduced in a manual paste-up process. And we migrated from paste-up, which we had these typesetting machines. We migrated the entire thing to an HTML and now XML first production process. And the point of this is that the beginning of our process, once we have the manuscripts, starts with conversion to XML or HTML in those days. And then everything is done on that XML. The reason you do that is that any changes that are made go back to the original source code, and you keep track of every change that's made. We decided to deliver the articles in print and Acrobat Reader. No-brainer. It flowed nice and easily from the XML or HTML files. We made available as a business decision that we were going to make title, authors, abstracts, and references online, and an article in PDF, but we were going to make the TLC and the front matter, which is the abstracts and the references, freely available. That was a business decision that we made. It was not something that was common practice at the time. It was a decision that we made to enhance our products, not because we wanted to give something away, but we made it to attract people to come in and use the product. We built search indexes. This print and the search index, all of the searching is done from a single source, so there's an exact match between that. Well, by 1998, all of our journals are now online from a single DTD, document type definition. We require all of the people who compose, and we have 3 composition shops, to do this with the exact same DTD. So all our articles, all the source code are exactly in the same file format. We went back to 1893 with our front and back matter, that's title, author, abstracts, and references, available now in XML. So we have a huge database, all adhering to the same philosophy that says that our content adheres to the same standard and we can do other things with it. By 1998, we started deconstructing the journal process. Again, because we had the articles ready to go at the time that they were finished being peer-reviewed or actually finished author-proofing, we started publishing our articles daily. One of the business advantages of doing that was that we saved up to 8 weeks in the article publishing time frame, so that articles that would have been published and have a publish date at the end of a month now possibly were published up to 8 weeks earlier than that date because we were ready to go with them. And we were able to link to other journals. Now, that was a big thing that went around back in the 90s, creating the linking and the digital object identifiers. But now it's part of the production process, and all those DOIs are built into it. Again, because we have a single standardized file, a single standardized way of doing it, we can start to introduce other deliverables that we couldn't have done before if we had to adhere to the multiple ways of doing things. Currently, we are developing new deliverables. Again, this is a business opportunity. For an example, we have this common backfile XML source, and we're using that to develop new revenue-producing deliverables. We license for use our XML files in secondary publishers. Secondary publishers could be ISI, secondary publishers could be Scopus, OCLC, and there's a bunch of them. For a fee, we allow people to come in and harvest from the source file to ingest it into their database, not the readable, but the XML, and we harvest it, or we allow the harvesting using the Open Archive Initiative protocol, which is maintenance-free on our part. So once we get the contract set up, we open up the link, they come in anytime they need it and find out what's new, and they download it. We started introducing RSS feeds, starting to replace the table of contents and the alerting services. I put the word Wikipedia at the end of all these things. You can go to Wikipedia. That's where I source a lot of my explanations. But Wikipedia is a pretty valuable source, at least in the web world, to decide or to define some of the things that we're talking about. We came out with microformats. That's another web-based approach to re-tag or to group together original tagging into a different type of format. For an example, our articles are tagged by author, they're tagged by affiliation. They're not tagged by author and affiliation. We can use a microformat approach that says, send me an address file for an author or the authors of this article, and microformatting will allow us to go in and say that all these things relate to each other, and therefore you should have it. MathML is another language that we're looking at for mathematics. Equations, I don't know if you've ever read anything from PRL or PRD or any of our journals, but equations can be complex. We have adopted a MathML strategy, which is a markup language for math that includes XML so that you can describe the notations both in its structure and in its content. What we're doing is we're getting away from math just for display and getting away from that towards math to be repurposed for other uses, and I'll talk about one of them in a minute. In not too distant future, we're going to go to using an XML concept called RDF, and it's a specification that allows us to start to define content. For example, defining an article as being a high-energy physics article, or defining an equation as being appropriate to high-energy physics versus condensed matter physics. We're looking at personalization. Personalization is a concept that says that you can come into our sites, and because we know you're an author, we know you're a referee, we know you're a reader, we know whatever, we can customize the deliverable based upon your needs and your history. We'll be doing that within about the next year. We're looking at SVG for figures. SVG is an XML specification that allows you to put text inside of figures. It allows you to take a figure and have not only figure captions embedded in it, but perhaps other explanations, including data. One of the arguments or the holy grails for the web world is to have data available. Well, SVG allows you to have a place to put the data. I know Wiley's been doing this for some time now with textbooks, and it's really a brilliant way to deliver information underneath figures. My latest project is on the fourth bullet, and that is XML, MathML, and SVG to a DAISY reader. A DAISY reader is an XML reader for the blind. We have a project going where we're going to make all of our articles available to the blind and to dyslexic readers so that they can listen to the articles and navigate by listening to them or navigate with their ears, and that includes having text equations so that you can listen to an equation and it won't say E equals MC soup strep or whatever. point is that it's not, in my view, a question of is it worth it for any publisher. I think you have to. I think that in order to go forward into the future, as deliverables change, and there's so many articles now about deliverables such as the Kindle from Amazon, iPhones. I've seen iPhone applications where you can actually read scientific articles on an iPhone or on a smartphone. All these new devices are coming out there. People are looking for new ways to read, new ways to consume, new ways to link together products. And the one way to do that is to have a common source so you're not reinventing yourself over and over and over again. You're not reinventing your production process. And as I like to tell my database customers, we can guarantee consistency of information because the information we provide is the information that was published. There's no translation. It's as it was. And I think that's my point. Did I talk too much, Greg?
No, I think you were just fine. Thank you, Bob. A couple of questions for you. One of the benefits that you had emphasized throughout your presentation dealt with standardization of the data that you're working with. And it led to the creation of a huge database. And you had indicated that with your daily publishing that it helped to decrease time to having materials available online or completed through the whole publishing process. What were other primary drivers that had caused you to very early on be able to go through and adopt the HTML, XML type of workflow, other than creating the huge database and the decrease in time production that were probably the biggest gainers for you early? I know you're talking about some of the work that you're doing currently, but what were the big gainers early for your organization?
Well, the first big gainer was to be able to go online and printing simultaneously. That was the primary cause for going forward. When I came to APS, they said we need to go online. I said we can't do it without an HTML process. That was at the same time that Tim Berners-Lee was coming out with the web, and they were very the people in CERN, which is a high-energy physics lab in Switzerland, were very strongly advocating HTML, so it was an easy sell. The great benefit was being able to go online instantaneously. For an example, if we composed an HTML, or in those days, and then XML, one of the benefits was that when you printed the file, you printed as a PostScript file. That was something we never did in the past. So once you have PostScript, you have a PDF. So there was very little extra stuff that we had to do to create an online deliverable to go online. So that was the first big driver and push. The second driver, the drive to go early printing, was a business need that was pushed, or early publishing was a business need that was driven by our end users who wanted to see their articles available as quickly as possible. And we were competing in those days with the gray literature world, where people were posting their articles in their raw manuscript format, and we wanted to get the official archival version out as quickly as possible, so we shortened the print cycle, or the publishing cycle. That was not without some noise from other people in the industry, but we did it, and I think it's becoming more and more of a standard. That was the beginning, and that could have been the whole thing, except that, as we all know, science marches on, and people were developing new tools or new things that we could do based upon the XML. The one about being able to make it available to the blind was something that I actually did back in 1987 at IBM, where we made IBM manuals available to the blind to be read and listened to using a screen reader device. So I knew that worked. My motivator for going to HTML for APS was to get all of our journals in that format so we could do the same thing. And you'll say to me, well, Bob, how many blind physicists are there? And I'd say, well, probably not many, but there are dyslexic physicists, and we can reach an audience of people who have difficulty reading or parsing sentences. It's easier for some of those people, dyslexic people, to listen to it. So that was a motivator that drove us forward. The idea we always knew that once we had this archive of XML, that we would be able to reuse it and sell it, or license people to reuse it, and it became part of our deliverables. So those were were several of the opportunities. The ones that I mentioned about Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 were really being poised to take advantage as technology unfolds. Did I answer your question, Greg?
You certainly did. Thank you. I have another couple of questions that are related to the whole implementation process that ATS has gone through. Today we have the NLM DTD, which is available for folks to be able to use, that could have the potential to become fairly much of a standard associated with STM publishers. That did not exist at the time you guys got rolling, and what you were doing with HTML and then migrating into XML. Are there any recommendations that you would have for folks who are looking right now at the implementation of XML? And would the NLM DTD be a good place to start, or should folks go the route that ATS had gone and it was basically build your own?
I wouldn't go our route. In fact, we tried not to build our own. In 1993, there was a American Association of Publishers DTD out called ISO 12083. When we started, excuse me, down this path in APS, and we were going towards HTML, our first criteria was to do everything in ISO 12083 as a DTD. I had gone to, and by the way, we don't do any of this stuff ourselves. We have, as I said, can you do HTML composition, HTML first, to the ISO 12083 DTD. So we didn't build a DTD. We used one that was in existence, and they said yes. There was maybe one or two elements that needed to be added, but it would work. So we said fine. That experiment that I talked about with the integration of content from multiple publishers was done all with ISO 12083 that a lot of people adopted. But like that old saying, a rose, a rose is a rose is a rose, but they're all different colors. A 12083 is 12083, but they're all different. There was a lot of differences in math because the composition vendors were using different composition engines, whether it was Cyvision or I forget the name of the other ones. When we started moving forward, we got into the XML coming out. We wrote our own DTD. It was based upon an extension of 12083. The guys who worked for me who wrote that DTD also collaborated with NLM. So a lot of our thinking is in the NLM DTD. So we can transform into the NLM DTD with no problems. But we transform into other things with no problems.
Right. That ends up being one of the beauties of being able to work with XML. You have the capability to be able to move from one format to another, especially if you have some folks who are versed on staff or with third-party organizations that are good at using tools like XSL.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's, being able to transform, I'm not using the right word, but there's a XSLT.
Yes.
Where you can insert, that's where you can insert things like micro formats and repackage or provide metadata over the XML that you have so that it comes out formatted differently.
Correct.
And it's really a plus. We are never at a point of saying we can't do that because we don't have the source code to be able to do that. We do get into a point of saying we don't want to do that because it doesn't fit our business model. But it's never in the point of saying we can't take advantage of a request because we don't have the source code.
That's very good. Thanks, Bob. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to switch things over to Andy Williams. And Andy, you're now the presenter. Andy's talk is XML for the smaller publisher, and it's a case study describing what Cambridge University Press has gone through. Just a housekeeping reminder to everyone, I am collecting questions that are coming through in the chat. I will ask a couple specific to Andy's conversation with you after he concludes his presentation. I am recording the other questions, and then I will bring these up when we have our roundtable discussion at the end. Andy, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Good afternoon from the UK. Good morning in the US. When we were putting this talk together, Bob and I had a chat, and I agreed with almost everything Bob said, which was scary because it meant we might have given the same talk. But what we decided is Bob would do the sales pitch to you of why you want to do XML, and then maybe I will be a little bit more cynical and calm you down a bit and point out some of the problems you might have based on the case study of what we've been through. I'm not trying to be cynical about this, I just really want to alert you to things you might want to think about. So what I'm planning to do is give you a simple overview of what we do, look at some of the lessons we've learned and hence changes we've made, and then maybe walk you through the decision processes if you are starting out on this, what you might want to do, and if you're not starting out on this, what you might want to actually sit down and think about anyhow to double check, and this is something we're thinking of doing right now in Cambridge ourselves. So I think even if you've got XML, you need to think about, keep reviewing it. Unlike Bob, I'll probably be very naughty and not keep the time, but if I start a stopwatch now, I'll try and keep an eye on it and not overrun by too much. The slides will be available, so some of these slides, if I skip over them really quickly, you can look at me at leisure later. First off, just to give you context. Academic is split into two parts. There's journals and books publishing in Cambridge. I guess we're not one of the smaller publishers. We're a medium-sized publisher, really. And in the academic arena, we're pretty big, I guess. 1,500 new titles come out of the US and the UK offices combined a year. We have an XML-first workflow for books. We do as many of them as possible through that workflow. We do have a lot of author-supplied LaTeX titles, and those titles we don't bother trying to convert across to XML. So I think it's around about 65% of the 1,500 titles are probably in the XML workflow. And we've been doing this since about 2000, 2001. We've learned a lot of lessons in that time. On the book side, we do have a single dedicated DTD called Cambridge Books Markup Language that we have created and keep in-house. And we do create a lot of end deliverables as well as the print products. We do Adobe eBooks, we do linked eBooks, we do as much as we can of the XML to HTML-based eBooks such as Mobi. And I'm not going to dwell on our workflow particularly, but I think the key thing to point out about this is of interest is, as Bob was saying, we actually convert our author files, if we can, to XML before we copy edit. There are some major downsides to this, but it is how we originally set up the workflow. The rest of it is really just showing on that slide where it goes to other places. But the key point is the left-hand side, where we're actually going to the typesetter before going to copy editors. Sorry, I clicked on the right bit. And then just give you context for our journals. We have 231 journal titles in total, about 1,000 issues a year. And the vast majority of these are as an XML workflow for the full text, because we deliver them as HTML online. We have our own online delivery platform called Cambridge Journals Online, where we deliver these to. Even those journals that we can't do as XML, which actually, interestingly, Bob was talking about MathML, we decided to take some of the MathML out of HTML and just do them as PDFs, because they were just too much pain to show these incredibly complicated equations. But even those need an XML header to drive our platform. We have to have a wrapper around the PDF to upload it. So everything has some sort of XML. And we've just about to complete a massive 4 million page scanning project of all our back material, back-coded all our references as XML, because we believe that's an important component for a journal. We do have a dedicated DTD. It's an interesting question about NLM. It's been informed by the NLM Journals DTD, but it is actually slightly more granular. We call it Cambridge Journals Markup Language. What we do though, and I'll show this in the next, so I can move to the workflow, we actually use NLM as an export or a transfer language. So in-house in our production processes we use CJML, but at the moment that we need to ship it to third parties such as Portico, we actually convert to NLM, and we even use that principle to deliver it to our own platform. So our web developers in-house receive NLM. The production process actually delivers CJML. So we've actually used the model of a universal transfer as NLM for everybody. We don't cheat and give our own platform CJML. However, we believe, having looked at it, that we wanted a little bit more than the NLM DTD offers, so we've actually extended it slightly. So that's the context of what we do at the moment. Just to alert you to, that isn't actually how we started out. One of the key lessons we learned is don't do a DTD for books and journals and think it's going to work and have one DTD. We tried that. it was actually really built for humanities books, and then it got extended to STM books and then to journals, and no one was particularly happy. Journals, certainly, it was just hideously complicated, and our composition typesetters hated what we were doing to them because they had to jump through hoops to make this thing work for the journals. We tried it, we ran it, and it wasn't working. The other problem we had with it was to make it actually work, we had to make it so extensible and flexible that it almost became pointless, because you could define anything in it, and there was no consistency or follow-through on the structure. I think more recently we've identified as well that actually even a single DTD book for books needs to be queried. This is actually driven out of the other part of the company. We have an English language teaching division who are now looking at going to XML, and they do textbooks which are very similar to our academic textbooks. And we are starting to think, gosh, it doesn't really work for textbooks, our DTD, does it? A monograph is a very different beast to a textbook, and that's very different for a dictionary or a major reference work. So I think one of the things we're now trying to think about is, do we need to change that DTD and move it into break down into subsets even? One of the other lessons we've learned, not the hard way, but we have learned, is standards are open to interpretation. The NLM DTD, when we did look at Highwire at one point, maybe to take our journals, and we realised that how they read the NLM DTD was actually different to how we read the NLM DTD. And I think we're both right, but there was an issue there, and we've actually decided, okay, we'll go with our standard in-house, and then you tell us what your standard is, Highwire, your version NLM, and we can convert it to what that is. And then the final big lesson we've learned, and we're working on this right now, and we have been for some time, is the problem with doing XML right up front is the holy grail of a decent XML editing environment that authors and copy editors can easily adopt is still not there in the market. I've been working in this area for far too long, and I know back in the late 90s we really believed it was nearly there, and it's not. So we've got a big issue with doing it early in the process of how do you actually release that to people, such as authors or copy editors, in a way that they can cope with it. So, moving on from this, I think if you're going to do this, there are clear, informed decisions you can make, and there are various decision points that you might like to think about. And very quickly, I just was going to go through these and try and use them to actually highlight some of the things we've done. So what, why, what, when, where, how, and who, how I summarise them, those are probably not the perfect terms for them, but I think they're useful just to hang this off. The top one, anyone who does project management, why, what's the objective? You've got to define the scope of what you're doing at the beginning. What are you trying to do? And I know that sounds absolutely obvious, but so many projects fail, nothing to do with XML because no one defines the scope. And I think with XML it's even more important because this can be challenging to the business. Bob mentioned solving business problems and not worry about the technology. I think he's actually absolutely right. I think XML can throw up a huge number of problems. And if you do not have your scope clearly defined, you could end up doing this for the sake of it and not actually working out why you really want to do it. So, jumping on to some of the why. The why bit I wasn't going to focus on too much because Bob has to a large extent talked about at least the end deliverables and why you might need it. In his slide, he did actually touch on briefly on the fact that you might do it purely because you want to have it inside the production process and not actually want XML at the end of the process. There are strong advantages to have what he calls a standardized production process. And back in the 90s, I used to work in a composition company, typesetter as I would call it, and I discovered, to my delight one day, that our in-house standard was XML. Everything we got in from all our customers, all our publishers, the guys beavering away doing composition, I didn't realise, were actually, the first thing it was converted to well-formed XML because it meant everyone in the factory could actually work on the same thing and understood what it looked like. And given we were working for a huge number of publishers on a huge number of directories, that really automated the process. So from a composition point of view, you definitely do that. But I think there are strengths why you might do that throughout the process, even as a publisher. The other part, which I've put on here is why. The lesson that Cambridge learned is we've had a very far-seeing and visionary leader who said, we want to do XML. And I pretty much think that the production went, yeah, no problem, that sounds exciting, we get to play with things. I'm not sure at the time that our customers, our editors, actually realised why we were doing it. And it became a barrier to them. And then they believed it turned into a magic bullet. And the word XML meant that if they had it, everything was perfect and the world would be great. collaborate and they could do all those exciting things that Bob said. And unfortunately, obviously, that doesn't work. And there are different types of XML, and is it actually going to be appropriate for what you want to do? I do spend a lot of time with colleagues who really, really are very good at doing a lot of things, trying to explain to them that there's XML and then there's XML, and if you haven't tagged something, you can't find it by magic in there. You've got to actually know what you're trying to tag. So I think the why is the absolute critical bit. Why are you trying to do this? But make sure that you've actually thought through the rest of the company why you're doing it and included them in that talk. You then get into the what, and that's one of the questions that have been asked. So you've got various options, I believe. You can have your own bespoke DTD, which is the way Cambridge went, although the second time round, the journals at least were very much informed by the NLM DTD. You could go for a standard DTD, TEI, DocBook NLM. There are barriers, we believe, with that. I think the TEI one, we believe, is far too wide and comprehensive to really focus on what we need, so we've always shied away from that. I've also mentioned on here, you could actually do it without a DTD and just have well-formed XML. And in fact, what we're talking to our English language colleagues about is a thing called dirty XML, which is not a markup language for semi-erotic books. It's the concept of actually saying, we don't know what we want as a DTD or what we're going to do with this, but we know one day we're going to regret not having XML. So what they're looking at is trying to standardize the design of their titles so they have standard design tags in InDesign. And then actually just using the ability of InDesign to export XML out that really isn't tagged with DTD, it's just got a load of well-formed tags on it, which they're going to put away, and they're calling it dirty because it's not being really QA'd or checked. They're going to put that away, and then in a couple of years' time, when they realise what the need is, they're going to actually do the final bit of the work of converting it to something better. And I think that's actually quite an interesting option to be pursuing for them. I've mentioned schemes on here very briefly, mainly because I was told about 3 years ago by a consultant we had in that as a publisher, schemes are far too complicated, don't touch them. And I took him literally, and I've avoided them like the plague since. But I know every now and then questions about whether we should use DTDs or schemes arise. We just avoided it completely. I've already touched on how many DTDs you want. We started with one, we've now got two, but we're building about 4 more for our English language colleagues, and some of those actually will be relevant to academics. I think you need to be looking at what do you want to do. Do you want one size fits all, which is what Bob's got, or do you actually have to look at your product list and say, no, we do have different products, and they do have special needs. I've mentioned on here, actually, who is going to maintain this stuff. It is an issue. If you go with a bespoke DTD, you're going to have an infrastructure to try and support what you're doing. The advantage of going with a standard DTD is obviously someone else has done the work for you, but also that gives you the frustration when it doesn't work for you and you need to change something, you've got to do something with it. And I've chucked in at the end just to say, if you're doing this, I mean, Bob was talking about, we've got XML, we've got the source file, it's great. Well, that's exactly what we did in academic books, and we have the XML. But one of the reasons I was told we did this whole process was so we could reprint our books and make corrections and do second editions. But the problem there is it's not that easy, because you then have to take them back to the composition company and ask them to start all over again with a new star file. So if you're going to get the XML, do you actually want to get the application files and the star files that the composition companies use to come in with you? And I know some of our competitors do actually have the 3v2 files delivered from their composition partners or LaTeX. That will have an impact on which composing teams you want to use and whether you're going to predicate what engines they use. When, again, has already been touched on, it has to be, when in the process do you want to do this? This is linked back to why you're doing it and what the benefits are. If one of the reasons you're doing it is you actually want to have online early, say, publish your journals, articles, before they've been copy edited, as the society, not the society, sorry, the Royal Society of Chemistry, that I referenced on here, they actually, their colleagues on the other side of Cambridge, they publish their articles not only before they're copy edited, but as they copy edit them as HTML, because they actually capture straight to XML before copy editing. So if you want to do that, you're going to have to do it early. You could do it later on, and you could back-end it. And again, there are lots of competitors I know who actually don't bother with the production process benefits to go for a back-end. I'm concerned about that because in terms of the QA, I do believe that leads to a second set of proofing that might be required. If you can roll the proofing of the XML into the actual typesetting process, then I think you may be saving yourself the method at the end. But again, that is very debatable. The other point that I mentioned earlier about when to do it in the process is, are there actually authoring tools or copy editing tools that are suitable? We've been looking at Word a lot as a means of doing an XML writing editing environment. There are other tools out there, and I believe the RSC actually use XML, and we've used XML Spy in-house, but there are issues there. When are you going to do it? Can you actually do it because of that? So I've set various constraints, whether you've got editorial tools. I think there's also a very major constraint, which is actually the structure of the publishing process at the moment. It's very much author commissions, copy edits, production, get on and make it. I think there are possibly extra roles that we've identified. There may be a role required for someone to actually structure the content, not worrying about the words, the spaces and the spellings and the grammar, but actually saying, I'm going to specialise in understanding structure, because that is something that I don't really believe happens at the moment. Copy editors amongst you might be screaming right now and shouting at the phone, but I think there is a role for some new job description there that maybe doesn't exist in British publishing. And a key constraint, I believe, is actually the whole QA process throughout. Is this going to become a major overhead for you? Is it going to cause you problems? Is it easy just to do it at the end and QA after the event? There's a whole thing about where, and I'm quite interested to plot. This is sort of geographically where you're going to do it, as opposed to where in the process. Are you going to do the maintenance of the DTD in-house? Are you going to do that out-house? Are you going to do your coding in-house or out-house? Obviously, as Bob said, he's using 3 main composition teams. We use about 5 or 6 in the UK, spread around the world. We made a big mistake in Cambridge, I believe, and I'm amazed that Bob got away with it. We did a triple whammy. We went from actually having in-house typesetters in Cambridge University Press, about 60 of them, to actually going completely offshore, all the way out to India, and going to XML all in one step. And one of the things I'd warn you about is that that's actually doing change management in a massive way, and probably too much at once. Our ELC colleagues, I think, have learned those lessons, and what they've said is, let's learn how to go offshore first, because they actually typeset on out-house stuff in the UK. Let's learn about offshore first, because we know we want to do XML, and we can't afford to do it in the UK. Let's go offshore. Let's get the working relationship sorted, and then when we've done that, let's then try and roll out XML, so we can actually see what's the problem about the offshoring and what's the problem with the XML workflows. And they're really glad right now they've done that, because they are struggling. They're using one of our main academic suppliers who've been working for us for ages and really should know us inside out. But because there's a different working relationship, they are really struggling in ELT to actually get the offshore bit working. If they'd gone for XML as well, they really would be not getting their products out to market and struggling. So I think you've got to work out where you want to do it, and then you've got to work out how you're going to get to being able to do it like that. And I think take it easy. Don't rush into it all at once. Just checking the time for Greg shouting. I think it's still okay. In addition to actually where geographically, therefore who the typesetter is, I think there are some other areas about the who's that you need to think about. Do you want your typesetter to do the coding, or do you want a different person to do the coding, and it could be another typesetter, and to swap that to the people doing the pagination? It's something we've thought about, and I know 1 or 2 people have actually done that. So one supplier will code and hand that book to another supplier to typeset and vice versa. Apart from those, I do think there are some infrastructure issues that come with it. Archiving, the press is very sophisticated in its archiving policy, because obviously if you make all this lovely XML, as Bob was talking about, his big database he originally had, you need to put it somewhere so you can find it again and do something with it. So you can get yourself an XML workflow, but you might want to be buying yourself some sort of digital asset management system to actually cope with it at the end, to store this stuff. And you might need people who are actually going to be able to cope with the queries that come in from the code, from the typesetters doing the coding. So you may need some fairly robust infrastructure in-house to cope with going down this route. The other thing we have in Cambridge is that we wrote our own QA tools, as well as parsing the DTD. We've got rules-based checking with it's a tool called Caveat, which is our bespoke tool. we just keep adding rules to this thing, saying, oh, if you see this, it must have this. So an example is, you can't have a book without an author. That could be in the DTD, so it's a bad example. I can't pursue that one. We run that caveat tool, but we also give it to our suppliers. We have to maintain that and maintain the rules. For the XML to be worth the electronic medium it's transferred on, I can't say the paper it's written on, it really needs to be curated. If you're going to archive it and use it again, you need to know it's in a good state. So there's a whole load of infrastructure that comes with it, and you've got to make decisions about who's going to do this. As I say, in Cambridge we use our typesetters to do the coding and the pagination, but we actually in-house control the archiving, the QA, and the maintenance of things. So to go back to the beginning, I think if you can answer all the questions we already put together, you should have almost answered the how you're going to do it. So I think you've got to communicate and control it. It's the big issue, as I say, we learned, is did we actually communicate this internally? The other issue that I've touched on very briefly here is how much control do you want to have of how it's done? I think in the early days, because we developed this with one specific partner, we were very in their faces, basically, with how they were going to do it. We wanted to know what typesetting engine they were using and exactly where they were doing it, and we wanted to see all the in-house tools they had, and we were trying to predicate our workflow through them almost. Subsequently, one of our other suppliers said, why are you bothering, Andy? Why don't you just tell them exactly what you want when? If you want XML for copy editing, you tell them. If you want it at first proof and you want it 10 minutes after the PDF, you tell them. And then let them work out how to do it. And you don't need to be stressed. If they want to cheat and key it like crazy behind the scenes at the last minute, that's their problem, not yours. And I think there's merit in both those approaches. I think you need to know what your suppliers are doing and understand the tools they're using, because it will help you develop what you're doing. And with, again, one of the things we're looking at is whether we can use InCopy to help feature in design. That needs to work with the supplier. On the other hand, you can get very hung up on that, and you may just want to work on your internal stuff and say, look, all I want is this. I want XML here, there, and at the end. You go away and sort out how to do it, please. So I think there's a real balance you've got to get there. Word templates are the thing that drive us crazy at the moment. It's really important to us to get this right, because this is customer satisfaction of our copy editors and our authors. All of the suppliers we know have Word templates. What we're trying to decide is, do we take their standard templates, which are all obviously slightly different, or do we need to actually look at saying, no, we want to actually make it into one standard for Cambridge, and therefore have to predicate what they're doing. And then the final bit I mentioned on this slide is, I think you need to keep monitoring why you're doing this. You need to go back to that first question. Why are we doing this? What's the project objective? And are we still actually delivering that? Because I think it's very easy to get off track, and maybe, I do believe some publishers get a bit obsessed about the delivery of XML becoming the end in itself, rather than actually just a facilitating technology or something to go somewhere else. So I think you really need to monitor, review, and change, and that's something that in Cambridge we are literally kicking off right now to see how we can go. So, very quickly, I'm nearly at the end. Some other lessons learned. There's a few peripheral change management issues that I think are absolutely key beyond the technologies. Where we got it wrong, we were driven by a vision and the fact that we could do it technically, but maybe our editors weren't ready, and we should have actually got them on board and had our disruptive technology. And it shouldn't, therefore, be done behind the closed doors of production. You can't say, oh, we'll deal with this, don't you worry your heads. You need to get the rest of the company on board, the editors and everybody. And I think it could challenge the structure of publishers. If I were to set up my own publisher tomorrow, I'd be quite interested in actually writing new job descriptions and saying, the old model that has worked for the 425 years that Cambridge have been printing and publishing, maybe those job descriptions need to change. Maybe an editorial role is a bit different, and maybe a copy editor is a bit different, and maybe there's something between the two of those that doesn't exist. So I think it is good to get the whole publishing company involved in it and to look at what's going on. And I think you need to remember that you can't necessarily, although Bob seems to have done it, put everything you do through an XML workflow. And you're going to need to make sure that the titles that you cannot do as XML don't get forgotten. And at times we've been guilty of that our LaTeX titles and our non-XML journals do get a little bit pushed aside, and they don't necessarily get the full benefit of getting to the same ebook products that the rest get to. You might not be able to take them through XML to get there, but they should still, I would argue, benefit from getting the same complete service. So, conclusions. I was trying to draw all that together last night to say, well, what is it you're trying to do? I think the main conclusions are, have your eyes open when you go into this of what it's going to be. Be clear on what the implications are that are not technical, but actually infrastructures and issues that may get in the way of just getting the print product out, which is one of the things the editors always complain to me about. Bear in mind that you will be automated and not automatic, and that any of your customers who comes to you and says, well, you can do that easily now because it's all going to be automatic. It's not, I'm afraid. We transform our XML to Moby Pocket ebooks, but we can't do that just by pressing a button. We're pretty close. Our script gets it 90% there, but we still need manual intervention to get those converted and finally QA'd, because everyone has a different problem. And being honest to say, would we do it now if we hadn't already done it? If we were sitting here with no XML in Cambridge, it's a no-brainer. For journals, we've got to do it. It is the way the market needs this stuff done, and Bob, I think, has sold you lots of advantages for journals. English language teaching definitely want this, because it is the only way that we can use their content in a granular way and repurpose it. And I'm sort of surprised that we didn't start with English language teaching 10 years ago whenever we started. Academic books, I think we'd do it, but I think we'd probably do it more selectively. We've done it for everything now, and it would be crazy, I think, to try and take a step back and not do that. But I think we probably, if you were starting out afresh, might be a bit more selective and actually try and look at some of our product lists, the humanities lists, and say, is this really appropriate for doing these titles? Will the sales actually, the peripheral benefit, have a major impact? And that was pretty much me trying to get to 25 minutes. I've overrun by 50 seconds, Greg. Is that okay?
Yes, quite all right, Andy. I think you did marvelously well. You certainly covered a lot of ground for us in this presentation. And I think it dovetailed very well with what Bob had presented earlier. Andy, I got a question for you that focuses in on the QA items that you had identified, because it hits to the root of a couple of questions that have come through from folks in the audience. And that's that Cambridge had to build a significant body of XML expertise in order to be able to put together the QA team that you've got there and to be able to manage the process of going through for archive and asset management. Two questions here. One is, do you think that's an absolute necessity for a publisher to go through, or is it reasonable to consider working with an external supplier and rely upon that external supplier exclusively to be able to validate the quality of the information that you're getting in? And then I have a follow-on question to that.
Okay, can I do the first one? The QA that we do, because I've got, as it says on my final slide, 2 jobs, so I'm slightly schizophrenic, which QA we do in content services is actually QAing that the XML obeys the rules that we can apply and parse it. It doesn't check that the way the composition company have coded it is actually correct. They can call something a play and it could have been a poem. There is no way we can check that, which is why we're keen to try and do that sort of QA at the coding level early in the process of copy editing. I think it would be interesting to look at using another supplier to do the QA, and whether you'd ask them to do more than we can manage, because all we can do is pretty much automated QA here. If we did go to, say, another offshore supplier and say, here's our XML, you could ask them to critique more widely and say, could you actually flick through and make sure that when people are coding things, it looks like they're using the appropriate tag, because it's very difficult for us to tell that. So I think you don't need to do it in-house. I think you will have to have some sort of archive, and if you've got an archive, you do need to have the confidence that whoever's doing your QA is telling you the truth, that what you put away is worth having, because you don't want to come along in 2 years' time and find that it's a load of rubbish in there.
Andy, the follow-on question to it is that it does require a significant amount of expertise in order to be able to build the QA tools that you're talking about, and then some of the archiving and asset management tools that you were describing. And these seem to me to be elements that smaller publishers may struggle to be able to find the resource to be able to work with. Would you have any particular recommendations for your folks to be able to take on, what you would train them to do, and what you would expect an outside supplier or a series of suppliers to provide for you?
I think that's a really difficult one. The actual team that does the XML and the XML archiving in Cambridge is pretty small. It's only about 4 or 5 people, but that's quite big for some small publishers I know. They built, so we bought a bespoke XML archive about 5 years ago, and we've just actually decided to rebuild it. And we've rebuilt it in-house based on Alfresco open source software. So it might not be that challenging. I mean, it could be that you could actually get a consultant and say, I want you to build this over the next 3 months. But we also have a massive digital asset management system that puts all our PDFs and everything else away. And that isn't small, and that isn't an open source software, and that does cost a lot of money. So I think there are issues. The other archive we use, which is cheating, is actually our online platform. We actually deliver the XML to it, and they actually store it as well for journals. So you could, I guess, if you cheated, shove it at Highwire and say, I've got an archive there, they've got a copy of everything. I don't think that's ideal. I'm not sure, to be honest, Greg, but there is an answer to the question. I know some of the offshore suppliers we deal with do offer archiving services, and that might be a route to go down, because it's going to be expensive, as you say, as a small publisher, to be doing this.
Yeah, I think that speaks to what you had described in your conversation as going through and making sure that you define the scope of the project that you're going to be working on. And then take things steady. Don't try and do everything all at once. So I think that was very good counsel and makes perfect sense. I'm going to open up the additional questions to both you, Andy, and to Bob. And Bob, I've got one for you that I'm going to direct to you first, and then Andy certainly can pitch in on it. And it has to do with the collection of data that comes in from your authors. Do you have any recommendations regarding formatting and templating that you would require of those authors?
Well, it's difficult. Our authors come in from all around the world. So we receive some 36,000 manuscripts a year. I'd say 80% of them are in some form of text, and 20% are in some form of Word now. The tech is easier to standardize because we produced a version of tech called RevTech that we make freely available for people to use. The Word translation or the Word standardization, so far we haven't come up with a template, an acceptable template that people will use. What we do when we bring them in, whether it's Word or tech, we convert them to PDFs, and that's what we use in the peer review process. And then our composition production vendors will take the accepted article and convert it into XML first, and then from there we go forward. So, I mean, for years, like a lot of other publishers, we had this kind of a holy grail belief that if you get the authors to do all the work, everything that we do will be easy. And so far, that has not had any fruit whatsoever.
Those pesky authors.
I mean, they're all over the world.
I agree. Andy?
I think I've got 3 comments to make. One is, well, for journals, our problem is we do such a diverse range of journals. We've got 2/3 humanities and a third STM. I mean, being honest, our authors are not necessarily writing in that journal's first choice. So if we try and impose a template on them, and it's not the same as the one Nature want, they're not going to write in it. They are going to do it in their way. So we do not try with journals to even impose anything. With books, again, we don't really have that control over the authors, and I think the feeling has always been amongst the editors that we really want the author just to do what they're good at, getting the words and spaces right, and then we should take responsibility. I've seen authors and people do terrible things with Word templates, and just it's unbelievable how complicated they can make things for themselves. So we've not tried to enforce that. I think there are some areas we do, again, the English language teaching are better off. They actually pay their authors rather than paying them royalties. So they actually can say, if you're going to write a book for us, you can do it this way. And I think we'll be able to assess whether there are some benefits of that. It's a bit of an anecdote, but I worked for a company that ran a paper typesetting system, and we used to do a huge amount of trade novels, the Robert Ludlums and stuff. And we used to get the author discs in, and to be honest, we used to actually throw them in the bin, get a bunch of typists to rekey the manuscripts. It would take about 2 hours, we had 10 typists, and then hand that into our production systems, because you've got one standardized format. I do worry that if you give an author a template, you're actually spending good time trying to unravel what they've done, and you might as well just accept what they gave you in the first place and start it from scratch. But that is a very cynical view.
Okay. I agree from a vendor perspective that a lot of times working with authors and templating systems can be very, very challenging. And it seems to be that the general pattern that folks have followed is exactly what you're describing, Andy. And Bob, to a great extent, with the Word documents that you're getting in the same, that you deal with what the authors have supplied you. They're very creative individuals, and they're not necessarily writing initially for your publication. So you try to be accommodating. So it's the conversion mechanisms that you be able to use, that you step through and try to make as standard as possible. Both of you have talked about having XML up front, and in some instances, it's XML before you get into a copy editing stage. Can you talk about some of the advantages that are involved in going to an XML upfront workflow that you have seen with your particular experiences?
I'll go first.
Bob or you?
Bob, why don't we start with you?
Okay. In my view, the advantage of XML up front is that it forces us to put all changes back into the original document. We've had experiences in the past where people would derive XML at the end of their product, at the production cycle, and invariably we would find errors that had not been incorporated because it was, they figured once the XML was produced, it was done and they would go forward, and so that we would have a breakage between our XML or HTML and the final product. We use that XML file as the full legitimate archival file of what we publish. So in fact, one could look at it and say that the thing that we're publishing or that we are archiving in peer review, the official article is that XML file. Everything else is derived from it. So we're very strong and hawkish with our vendors to ensure that XML happens first, that copy editing is done in XML, and it is, that they use the same DTD. Once in a while, we have taken files sent back to us from the various composition houses and sent them over to the other composition houses and say, typeset it. And it always comes out the same because it's the same DTD, and we use that as a test to make sure that it is the same. So more to a point of being rigid in enforcement of our rules. Could you do it later on? Sure, but then you got to make sure that any changes that happen get back into it. We have one space where everything gets back in and where XML is created, and we make sure that everything gets back to it.
Andy, your perspective?
I think I'm saying the same, Bob, but from a slightly different point of view. To me, every time you transform and change between formats, you have a risk of something going wrong. So if you go from Word to XML or into an in-house typesetting system, at that moment of transformation, things may not map across, and you've got a QA. So the beauty to me of having the XML early is you're in the final environment or format that product is going to stay in. That XML is what will drive the final typesetting engine. So we do an awful lot of books with weird and wonderful special characters in them. If we can go to XML right up front, we've got it then as Unicode, and we know that character is set in stone. It will stay as that Unicode all the way through. So we can then prefix the copy editors and the authors, and they're going to notice very early in the life cycle of the book that we've done something wrong. It may be just we've imposed the wrong font on the Unicode character, but at least the Unicode is stable underneath. My big concern is, and my colleagues have had this experience, is that if you don't do that, if you actually just leave it in some sort of Word format or RTF, it looks great early on. Everyone goes, yeah, the special characters look great. And then you transform it at first proof or something to XML. If that mapping isn't correct, you might not notice it, but you've got to put more QA in later, I think. So to me, it's actually just being in the final environment all the way through. So it's not quite so Bob's saying he wants one environment to put all the corrections in. I'm actually saying I'd like to know I'm in the final format all the way through the process so that I don't get any sudden shocks at the end.
So in effect, Andy, what you and Bob have both been saying is that by going to an XML upfront workflow, you're lessening some of the burden that goes onto that QA process that you had described toward the end. And
you're increasing the burden on the beginning of the process.
On the beginning of the process, but at at the end of the process for a back-end conversion, you've certainly lessened the QA level that's there.
Yeah.
We even dabbled with the idea of doing XML conversion before peer review, but so far we haven't done that.
Okay.
At least minimal XML. I mean, we convert the stuff that comes in to at least the heads and tails XMLs for populating our own database. And that's the same information that we pass on to our composition vendors.
Right. Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you. You have brought up an interesting concept, Andy, with regard to dirty XML. And this does have some attraction for very, very small publishers. The question that came in is, would we be mad to go the XML route in-house if we've got two journals which are being set and copy-edited Word documents imported into InDesign and PDF or web or print? The dirty XML route does sound possible. This publisher is interested in being able to get materials online as metadata, to be able to drive web content and get to full-text HTML, as well as to be able to produce provision of metadata to go to PubMed or Crossref. Would you comment on that, Andy? Does that sound like a feasible route to go for a very, very small publisher?
I think it could be a good experiment to start with. I think eventually you're going to want to use all the full power of XML and parsing and all the QA that can come in with a DTD, but I think at least in the first steps to get yourself used to the idea, then why not have well-formed XML and tag things up just at the level you need it? The problem is if someone misses a tag and you're not parsing it to DTD, you won't notice. But the model, as I say, we were looking at within design was to say get the designer to tag it structurally, which is what they're good at, and so therefore with this metadata you may have to persuade designers they do need to tag the names and references or something. But get the designers to do that and then use the style tags, which is completely against XML, I realise, but use the style tags to actually export this into some sort of well-formed XML. So I think that could be an interesting way to go. If you're small and you don't want to get embroiled in the whole thing to start with, try it and actually just get the experience of, well, as Bob said with IBM, a generic markup language. Because that's all XML is get that bit going first, get used to the concept of consistent tagging and coding, and then maybe that'll be easier to actually then say, well, let's move to having a DTD, and what DTD do we need at that point? You can look around and maybe an LM journal is the right one for you.
Bob, would you like to comment on that?
Our journals were started in 1893. And aside from going at some point in time to double column as opposed to single column, it's basically the same. And the journal that started in 1893, as it grew, twigged off into the journals that we have now. So everything that we have has a common ancestor. And so creating a DTD that fits across all of them was fairly easy. Oh, not easy, but it was fairly straightforward. The reason why we did our own, I think I mentioned earlier, is because there wasn't one available at the time, and LM hadn't come along yet. The point again is that XML is our archival file. We want it to be clean and consistent towards all deliverables. We archive everything ourselves. We host a delivery service ourselves for articles 4 years older and back. So every article that's published online goes into our archive and eventually shows up on our delivery service. The way that we do QC is that we require our composition houses to actually put the articles online in our primary delivery service. So they go through a QC process to ensure that it goes up, that it meets all the requirements, and then I have people who check it. But it works fairly clean most of the time.
I've got a couple of questions that are spin-offs, and they go in 3 different directions, so there's more than just 2 questions that are coming here, but it's from this line of discussion. Bob, first of all, this is going to sidestep to a slightly different track. You had talked about the length of time that your publications have been in existence, and one of the things that APS has done is gone back to be able to take this entire backfile archive and be able to render a significant amount of it into XML. How do you go about making that decision with regard to your content, and what would you advise for a smaller publisher in making that decision?
We made the decision because we figured out that that people wanted it, that our users wanted it. The way that this may not work for everybody, but the way that we did it was we started out with an experiment, wondering if it would be possible to take our old files that were all tech and TROF and stuff and put them online, and that didn't prove to be a viable technique. But we did, in talking to our customers, the librarians, find that there were many libraries that had the entire collection back to 1893 on their shelves, and that people were using it. So we said, let's start by doing 10 years worth. So in 97, I think we had back to 1987 online, and it became one of the more popular. It became as popular as the current content deliverables. And then we just said, well, let's go back a little further. We eventually went all the way back in about 3 different steps to the beginning. We scanned the articles from the older journals from 97 back, and then we hired a firm to do the XML keying for the front and back matter, or the title, author, abstracts, and references, and to put DOIs in where it was appropriate. Now, in 97 time frame, there weren't that many DOIs, so we have a process where we go out periodically and harvest all the new DOIs and stick them insert them into our archive. So the file that we have in the archive has a side file that contains all the linking information that go along with the original file. We also packaged the archival XML in such a way that the TD has a section called the meta section, which is the title, author, abstracts, and references, and all that other stuff besides not the body of the article and not the figures. That's the part that is the most popular part that we license for reuse in secondary publishers. So how do we make that decision? Part guess, part speculation, part listening to physicists say that, who are primary customers, that the libraries keep moving the current content off to the mudroom someplace in Yale, for example, and they can't get to it, and they would like to. And as we put it up, we started finding more and more people interested in using it.
That makes perfect sense. Andy, the next question I'm going to direct to you because I believe you have more experience at Cambridge and working with Word. There are a number of questions that are coming through with regard to the use of Microsoft Word. First and foremost, is there an easy way for you to be able to go from the Word documents that authors would supply to be able to get into the dirty XML route?
Depends on your definition of easy. Yes, it's an offshore typeset and they do it. I haven't, some of my colleagues have just been to India to view this, so I'm not quite sure where it's moved on to since I last saw it a year ago. Obviously, depending on how the author's written his file, you can, to some degree, automate, convert it into their in-house Word file, and then get that across to XML. But the easiest way is actually say, yes, I'll give it to someone offshore who has probably done this thousands of times and has got lots of programs hanging around to do this, and then we'll put some hands-on keys and actually do it by hand. So I'm not sure that's really a satisfying answer, but it is probably the easiest way of doing it. I guess the other way, which is where I was investigating last year, is take the Word file into InDesign, and there the design, have the design then type it up and tweak, and then get your dirty XML at the end. So that's a possibility, and that is something I spent quite a lot of the 90s doing, was abusing bits of software. If you can shove a file through another piece of software, such as Ventura or InDesign, it's quite amazing what comes out the other end of time. So I haven't done this for many years, but I'm sure there would be ways of getting dirty XML quickly by using the standard imports on some DTP packages, and then shoving them through their standard export. It will be very dirty, though, if you do that, I'm sure.
In terms of getting out well-formed exports from InDesign, just a comment on this. I do know that it's possible to go through and get a well-formed export from InDesign. It's also feasible to go through and use things like Word 2007 to come out with a save as XML, which gives a Microsoft flavor. So those could be routes to go. In many instances, what happens with tags in the dirty XML is that it's built extensively off the styles that are used associated with the documents themselves. Is that what you were envisioning associated with the dirty XML, Andy, where you would have style or originating tags that says this is a level 1 heading, that sort of thing, or was it more granular than that you were envisioning with the dirty XML route?
Because some of the stuff we're talking about is very heavily designed, it is actually slightly more granular than that, but it's that sort of concept. I think it was 2 pages of style tags we had, which is quite a lot of style tags. It's fairly granular.
Question about copy editing. And in the workflow at Cambridge, there's a fair amount of Word documents that are floating around. Are the copy editors in-house, or are they freelance, and are they utilizing just a straight Word document to do copy editing, or are you investing more time and energy in using a specific XML editor to support copy editing?
Our copy editors are all out-house, they're freelance. Our American colleagues are much more advanced in actually getting it done on screen, and they have very successfully gone down a Word route where we get our vendors to create a Word file, depending on who you believe, whether it's out of the XML they've already created or just before they make the XML, but they're creating Word files for copy editing. In the UK, we have a certain amount of baggage about Cambridge and copy editing and expectations and the people we use, and we haven't actually been able to push it on the screen bit, which is partly why you have to wonder why we're doing some of these things. You know, we're not taking a full advantage of it, and we should be in copy editing. I wonder if we stick around much longer, then we may actually jump straight to the let's use the XML tool and do it that way. We're trying desperately to start using the Word model that our American colleagues are using, and that is down to one of these change management things of persuading copy editors who are very used to having a pen in their hand to actually say, no, you can do it on screen. What I didn't touch on when I was talking is one of the reasons we go to XML first as well is we actually get the offshore typesetters to do a pre-edit. So they go through and they actually try and clean up, and they do try and tag references and actually do what copy editors in the old days would have done from scratch. So the idea being that when it gets to copy editors, some of the tedious by rote stuff, the checking all the references are actually there, has been done, and we're trying to accelerate that process. There is a certain resistance, and certainly in the UK, by the copy editors to that, because it's taking their work away. And they're not actually seeing, well, actually we're getting you to do the skilled stuff and get someone to do the non-skilled stuff. But that's part of this whole change management process we have to address.
Bob, I'm going to address the same question to you about copy editing and the experience. You described the proportion of files that come in as 80% text. I'm assuming the majority is the RevTech version that ATS has, and 20% that comes in as Word or other documents. How do your folks go through and copy edit? Are you doing physical paper copy editing as Andy had described in certain instances, or are you using on-screen tools?
Probably both. The way APS is structured is that my office is responsible for peer review. So we do all the peer reviewing, and we do that by taking whatever the author sends to us, which is all electronic, making a PDF and running it through the process. When we decide to publish it, we send it off to one of our 3 vendors, or partners if you want, who will take the file plus the author-submitted file. They will convert it to XML. They will do the copy editing. Some of them do it in a 2-step process, or online with remote copy editors. Some of them do it. I'm not quite sure how some of them do it. The criteria is that it's done right, and that it's affordable to us. The ultimate reviewer of the article is the author. We send all of our articles out for author proof. So the author will go through a proof cycle and correct any things that get lost in there. And there's complaints, oh, you didn't do the figure the way I wanted it. It's not the right font size, but we change it. We know we change the fonts. But we go through that. When the author proof stage is finally finished, it gets made into a PDF PostScript file for printing, into a PDF file, and it goes online. The composition vendor takes the XML, sends it up to our online vendor, which is AIP Citation Service, and they go through a final quality check done by the composition vendor, and then it's posted online, and we get the archival file. So are they doing it by hand, with quill pens, or with computer-aided copy editing? I don't really know. I know that we are very tight on the costs, and we control our costs. We ask for improvements in the process, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's more and more automation. I know at least one of the vendors has a fully online process. And again, while we only do peer review, we maintain responsibility for everything from the author-submitted article all the way out to delivery to the library or the end user. So we watch everything. We physically manage the peer review part, and we are kind of a pain to all the vendors.
Sure. Okay.
Could I just ask as well, Bob, with
Yes,
your comment on my head? One of the things that really interests me is a couple of our vendors are starting to look at providing web online editing tools so that you can actually have more control and see what's going on. The fear about sending files out to people is, as I say, in the past I've seen people do terrible things to Word files. Actually getting them in an environment that you can make user-friendly, but still see what they're up to, does strike me as particularly appealing if you can get the authors and copy editors to work in that way. So that's something that I think people may want to investigate in the future more.
Okay, I'm going to step on to another series of questions. This has to do with the selection of a DTD. And there are two primary questions here. You've touched upon most of the other things that folks have been asking about. Andy, the CDML, is that available?
I mean, it is IOs and it is therefore reasonably commercially sensitive. But I can see there are reasons why we'd make it available, because the more publishers using it, the more our suppliers would have to engage with it. I mean, the problem with writing your own DTD is obviously if you're small and you go to a composition house and say, there's my DTD, they have got to learn that DTD. And that was the problem we had with our previous DTD. It was too complicated, and it took about 6 months for anyone to really learn and get familiar with it. So no one's ever asked that question. I would have to find out. I guess it is copyrighted to us, but there may be some reasons why we want to make it public. I would have to consult more widely with my colleagues. I'm sorry, that's not a fully satisfactory answer.
No, that's a perfectly reasonable question and probably a very interesting follow-up to hear from you about. If the CDML is not available, what would you recommend to other publishers, perhaps monograph publishers who are just starting out?
I think that's the problem. When we looked at book and everything, and CDML is a distillation of the various things. I do think you've got to look at your content, and I'm not sure. I'm not the one who's written our DTD in-house, so I'm not the expert, but the team that did, I know they're not particularly keen on TEI because it is a bit too much for everybody. I think .book is probably where they'd have started from, if they were going to start again and say, we can't afford to do this, we'll do that. Because I know the NLM, there is, and one of my team is on the helps on that committee for the NLM book, but they're not convinced at the moment from the sort of sitting on the sidelines they've seen about it. So I'm not sure there is a book DTD, but CDML is really what's emerged. I think the problem, Craig, I'm not answering the question very well, is when we did this the first time round, we put everything possible in, and it got hideously complicated. And the second time round, we realised, well, we've gone crazy, and we've gone the other way, and we've pruned it right back down on the CDML. And I think that's the issue. You've got to actually know why you want it, where it's going to, and what your content is. And therefore answering the question for any other publisher is very difficult, because where it's going to and what your content looks like is very much unique to you. And it's not necessarily one size fits all.
Sure. So the gist of advice to somebody that would be looking to start up as a small publisher and wanting to adopt a standardized DTD or to come up with something that's relatively simple for the product line that they may have is probably to seek good counsel as far as either working with a consultant, as was suggested by somebody earlier, or to work with another organization that has had some broader experience with those questions.
So you could reverse it, Greg. You could I mean, if you're going to go offshore, you could try and pick your vendors
Right.
wherever they are, and then actually say to them what DTDs you're working with.
Correct.
Can you recommend one? Who
Correct.
are competitors using? And if it's an available one, then you could look at that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Bob, a question for you that's related to DTDs, and this is a very specific question, so, and you may or may not have the answer to this one. One of our listeners had the opportunity to prepare files in docbook format, sent them to bookshare.org, and then they were told that the bookshare.org was not able to use that format. And the challenge is that they'd like to know if there's another DTD that is a standard for the accessible marketplace.
Daisy.
Daisy.
Daisy. Daisy.org, www.daisy.org is a consortium started 12 years ago by Libraries for the Blind. They have a DTD. They just came out with a new version. It fits with the open ebook requirements. I know our DTD is easily transformed into the Daisy DTD. It's part of what we're going to use when we go out for accessible deliverables. They just put a XML piece into the Daisy DTD, and we're working with them to get an SVG piece for figures into it. So go to the Daisy site, www.daisy.org, and you can find information about the DTD there. You can even see examples of it that will work with Daisy readers, which are special book readers that incorporate and use the screen reader capabilities from a file. They also exploit the navigational information that's in the XML so that a blind or dyslexic person can navigate through the book just as a sighted person with using the table of contents and all those other things. And it's really quite remarkable how it works. I mean, I gave an example of one of our files, took a physical review letters article, we converted it into the Daisy DTD, or transformed it. I put it on a little handheld Daisy reader, a Victor Stream reader, and in the file there was the tagging for the authors showed the author names, and then there was the author affiliations with little links pointing to the affiliations. In several of the cases, there were 2 or 3 affiliations with each of the authors. There were like 5 or 6 authors in the article, but they were only written in the article once. The Daisy reader followed all the links and came out when it read the first author, it read also the first and the 5th affiliation and so forth, working its way to XML. And I would say look at the Daisy reader, or the Daisy XML, or the Daisy DTD.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one final question, and it has to do with the whole cost of being able to migrate to an XML workflow. And I'd appreciate feedback from both of you about what kind of investment your organizations needed to be able to go through. Was it a significant cost that was in place? And is there an advantage to going through a front-end cost, or is there an advantage, front-end XML, or is there an advantage to starting out with back-end XML? And how would you view that for a startup organization?
Well, it depends on how you're doing composition. In our case, all of our composition, with the exception of physical review letters, has been outsourced. So that when we started up with physical review letters, we knew that we wanted to outsource the composition of physical review letters, and we went out on our bid to find a composition house or production house that would do HTML up front. So the cost, I don't know what it would have cost to do any other way, but I know what we wanted, so we went after it and we got it. The other journals were being composed by vendors or by composition houses doing a much more traditional approach, and it took a while to get them over to an XML upfront process. However, we succeeded. The cost to us did not go up, so I'm not quite sure. I think they turned out to have a more productive flow, so it was in their advantage to go to our requirement of XML upfront.
And Andy?
I think I'm asking the questions backwards. You'll have to know what the first one was in a minute. if I took our books and we didn't do them as XML, we just chucked them through offshore typesetters, we would get a reduction in price. We know that. We can do them cheaper. It's not huge amounts of money. We're talking sort of like $2 a page saving or something. So the problem is it wouldn't give us the full suite of deliverables at the end. So we're not comparing like and like. If we do that, we don't get we don't get linked PDFs for our ebooks. We don't get HTML ebooks. We don't get all this stuff at the end. So it is cheaper doing it non-XML, but you don't get the other things. I also would quote, I know Wiley, I think it was at, I don't know if you were at talk at this morning in the UK, Helen Bay stood up at Wiley, and they were basically trying to implement the same workflow as us on the grounds that they believe they'd taken something like 1-2 weeks off their copy editing schedules by going through the XML first, pre-editing offshore to XML, then giving it to the copy editor, and that must have, it's not a cost saving, it's inventory throughput, and you're getting your product to market quicker. So if you can make it work and you can make the production process quicker, then you may be actually better off. I know that sounds like a strange way of justifying an increased cost, but you get your inventory through. So I'm not don't know if that answers that part of the question. I mean, doing it back end is, well, at least you know what you're paying for. It's a flat fee and you check it out at the end. And it can be pretty cheap. I think, though, you've then got to worry about your QA and whether what you get. I mean, to some extent, you get what you pay for. And if you check it all out and back end it, and you don't QA it, you shouldn't be complaining in a few years' time when it's not really as good as you'd hope it would be. So I think there's hidden costs if you do some of the processes. And I think almost as Bob implied, I think the best way is just to work out whether you can run it into the process so it becomes a cost-neutral thing, if nothing else, and no one notices. I think your first part of your question, Greg, if I still remember it, the issue for Cambridge is we went from in-house typesetting in Cambridge, in the building here, to India in one step. So you were never comparing like and like, and we made a massive cost saving. And the XML workflow was almost part of the justification of why we should actually no longer do in-house typesetting, because I think along the lines of, well, you guys can't do this, it's too complicated for you, but look, these guys in India can, and oh wow, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. That is a rather cynical view of what happened, but to some extent it was an agent of change, and therefore I don't think we could look at the costs involved and actually come up with any coherent statement about comparative costs in that area.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much. I'm going to wrap up the Q&A session at this point. I'd like to remind all the listeners that this web seminar was recorded, and you'll be able to listen to it again. You'll be receiving a link that will be circulated to all registrants after we've concluded the seminar, and you'll also receive a copy of the presentations that Andy and Bob have provided. Andy and Bob, thank you very much. I found the session very enjoyable, and you were both very, very good as far as going through and answering questions and with the information that you presented to us all.
Greg, you did well. Thank you, Andy.
This concludes today's conference.